understanding that, again, Deuteronomy is mainly, overall, it is Moses' farewell letter, his address, and some housekeeping information to the nation of Israel. We've already talked about how Deuteronomy is split into 3 farewell addresses. We are still in the second farewell address. We probably will be for maybe another lesson or two, because I'm picking out the most important sections out of it, and essentially that's what we're studying. In his first address, however, he called the nation to obedience, keeping loyal to the one true God, and understanding that, again, this is a new generation. Pretty much all of the older generation has died out. The only ones that are still around is Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. With Joshua and Caleb are going to be leaders that continue on. Of course, Joshua, we know from our study in the first farewell address, Joshua has already been, at this point in the timeline, has been told to publicly to the entire nation that he was going to succeed Moses as their leader, and they were to look to him for leadership, and of course Joshua was to look to God. But the only one left that we know has to die out, sadly, is Moses. And again, all of this came from what? Why did they all have to die out? The older generation.
They didn't listen.
They didn't listen. Disobedience. They did not listen. Moses, do y'all remember specifically why he, what situation caused him to get X'd from leading them into the promised land? That's right. Striking the rock. He was supposed to talk to the rock, and instead he hit Dwayne Johnson on the head. Oh, sorry. Alrighty. So last week we went to the second address, and continuing in this idea of obedience, but he starts to remind them about laws, because understand that the second address in Deuteronomy spans from chapter 5 to chapter 26. So it's a huge chunk of Deuteronomy, and it is going over laws. And we talked about how the law is a form of a tutor that was to help the Israelites stay on the path of righteousness. This is still true for us today. We talked about those scriptures, I'm pretty sure from Galatians, that talk about that as well, because Paul addresses to the church of Galatia, why the law was important, and it was a tutor that keeps us, it gives us the first foundations of understanding what obedience to God looks like. Again, just like for those of you who are parents, how do you teach your kids the difference between right and wrong? You show them, and if you don't, then they grow up and they do whatever they want, and then they get in trouble for it. So, kudos to you parents for, straightening out your children. Alright, so, this continued on into understanding, this brought us to the idea of the core foundation, not only of Judaism, but also with Christianity, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. However, one way Israel was to follow the Lord's commands and to keep obedience, which again, this is where we twisted thing. We switched, because we talked about, loving God and being obedient to Him and loving Him with all our hearts. And Israel, one of the ways they did this was they were to wage warfare against the kingdoms that were currently residing within the Promised Land borders. This is where we are reminded that this specific idea of waging warfare was only for Israel. We don't get that, past today. We don't get to go up and smack people with our Bibles because they disagree with us. Sadly. However, the idea of them waging warfare, okay, they're not fighting really, yes, they're fighting people, but they're fighting, as we're going to talk about tonight, they're fighting pagan nations. They're fighting against sin. Symbolically, the way that we Christians today, we have spiritual warfare. We have an enemy the enemy of all people, which is Satan and his minions, and the infection of sin in the world. And we have to battle against that daily, not just against outside forces, but also within us. Because again, understand, and I will preach this till the day I die, the day you become a Christian is the day you become your own worst enemy. Because your flesh does not desire to do what God designed us for. Okay? Your flesh wants to do all the evil, wickedness things, but now we have the Holy Spirit within us telling us a better way to live. And again, we do this because just like what we read last week, because we are to love the Lord our God with all our soul, heart, soul, and mind. And that's why, again, we talk about those scriptures that Jesus reiterated this. He says, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Little thing with that, though, loving your neighbor as yourself does not mean condoning whatever they do. Just putting that out there. And this leads us to talking more about Moses' second address, which is going to bring us to Deuteronomy chapter 8. Bree, if you will read verses 19 and 20.
If you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. Like the nations the Lord destroyed before you, so you will be destroyed for not obeying the Lord your God.
So right off the bat, we are reminded again of the covenant promise between God and Israel. Their obedience was necessary to continue in their mission to reclaim the promised land. God tells them that they are not to be like these other nations around them, these other Gentile nations. And again, look at the way it's worded here. It says, the Lord was about to destroy before you. The nations that God was about to destroy before you. If they became like the pagan nations, God would do the same to them. Okay? It was, oh Lord, what's the word I'm looking for? It was, oh Lord, starts with a C. I'm trying. Oh, nope. It flew away. I'm trying to think of the word. Conditional. It was conditional. Okay? They had a part to play with this. They had to do something to get the blessing of staying, of continuing to build up this nation. Okay? Yes, God was never going to renege on the promise, but again, as we studied in later chapters, we do know that Israel's flirtation with paganism and with sexual immorality and stuff like this eventually led to the Babylonian exile. Okay, and we know that the Babylonian exile was a huge turning point in the nation of Israel, because after that, the line of kings was broken. They have not had a king since, and they won't until Jesus reclaims the throne. So they were not to be like the pagan nations around them. Again, this sounds like a repeat of stuff we've talked about before. However, this is leading to a very important lesson, and this is the topic that's going to guide us for tonight. If the first week was about obedience and last week was about loving the Lord their God, well, tonight's subject is about self-righteousness. Seth, will you read Deuteronomy chapter 9, verses 4 through 6?
After the Lord your God has driven them out before you, do not say to yourself, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. No, it is on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going in to take possession of their land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God will drive them out before you, to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand then that it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people.
So these verses follow up a couple of absolute truths. That Israel has been called to fight against the people that were currently residing within the Promised Land. However, we are told that it's the Lord who will drive them out before Israel. Numbers, see, I told you Numbers was going to come back up. Numbers 14:9 says, only don't rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people of this land, for we will devour them. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. This was right as Joshua and Caleb and the other spies came back from inside the promised land from their scouting, and they told the nation, hey, we can take these guys. But then remember, those other spies were like, no. These guys are like giants. We're like grasshoppers, and then they're going to squash us. And then they got the fear among them spread throughout the Israelite camps, and then to the point where they were turning against Moses and all the leadership. And Moses was pleading with them, hey, God's removed their protection from them. Okay, we got this, like we really do. We just have to trust. God removed the protection from the nations, tribes, clans, whatever you want to call them, that were in the promised land already. This is what we understand of God's will. Okay, if He wants something to be accomplished, it's going to happen. It does not matter how much we fear the unknown. If God has laid something out to be done, it's going to be done. We just have to have faith and trust in it. And sometimes even when we don't have faith and trust, just like Israel, and turn away from it, it still ends up happening in the end. It just may take a 40-year wilderness journey for it to happen again. Yes, Israel did physically fight these battles. But when we, and when you if you've read Joshua or you've studied it before, you see how much God was with the nation of Israel during that struggle. But in Deuteronomy 9:4-6, what Seth just read, the Lord warns this younger generation of Israelites against self-righteousness, warning them in the latter parts of verse 4. Moses writes that Israel never needs to try to say that the Lord is doing all of these wonderful, miraculous things because of their righteousness. This was probably a great warning to this younger generation who, at this point, if Moses has told them that, hey, you had to wander the 40-year wilderness journey because this older generation who were, disobedient and fearful, they had to die out. So, you younger ones are going to be the ones that go in and possess the nation. I would imagine they were like, yeah, we are. We're going to do this. I would have felt pretty good about myself to think, hey, my spiritual walk is a lot better than my predecessors. However, Moses warned them that, this reminds me of how when something great happens in my life, the Lord has really, laid something out, or I'm having a really great day and I come home and I am just telling Crystal about all the wonderfulness that's happened, and it never fails. At some point, I will use I in the conversation. I did this today. And she'll be like, got a big head over there, huh? You need me to come over there and pop that bubble? Well, that's what they were getting. They were getting a big bubble about themselves. So Moses wanted to make sure that they weren't getting a big bubble. Moses was deflating the ego and making sure they stayed grounded in reality. Because I'm sure it would have been really tempting to be spiritually puffed up. I mean, imagine you are this younger crowd in Israel. You're about to take the promised land. You're about to wage war against all these nations. This is essentially like a rally cry. This is a wartime prep rally. And Moses is saying all these wonderful things about this younger generation that the older generation had failed at. And, I mean, I can just imagine them being like, we're going to do this. But, again, he's warning them against this, because going back from just a few weeks ago, this idea of being told they were to utterly about utter destruction that Israel was being commanded, to do against the people of this new land. And I mentioned how we are to utter destroy the sin in our own lives. Well, again, Jesus warns us that, in Matthew chapter 18, what we read, I believe it was last week, that if your body part causes you to sin, then cut it off. Well, this whole idea about Israel and not making sure that they're sinning by that they're supposed to remain obedient, and if they take this idea and be self-righteous and think, oh, it's on me, I did this, we were able to do these things, well, that's still a sin. God makes it clear that Israel is not going to conquer these nations by their own means. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the biggest thing here. They were not going to do this by their own means. This talks a lot of truth in our own lives, because there are times, I know I've had this, and if anybody wants to speak up, y'all can, but I'm sure there are times when we've had, a great week, we're doing things for the Lord, and things are just going, we feel like we're on easy street. It's easy for us to forget that the Lord is carrying us through those situations. And that we are like, we turn to our own ability and our own nature, and we're like, hey, I did something awesome today. And I'm not saying that we, Hannon, help me out with this one. I'm not saying that we can't be proud that we, accomplished something.
You take pride in your accomplishments and things like that, but you can't let that pride drive you.
Right.
Because ultimately, your giftings and abilities and all the good things that you do are a product of what God has given you and made possible.
There you go.
And those things can just as easily be taken away from you.
Yes.
And it's kind of like a whole thing of, you may have great strength. What happens when you become sick? Are you no longer useful to the Lord? No, you are. It's just now you're working in a different capacity, possibly using different giftings that you've never before even thought of using. So ultimately, God is going to gain glory for everything that happens. But, it's okay for us to be like, it's cool, it's great how God is using me for X, Y, and Z.
Amen. See, I knew you had the right words. God is making it clear that He Himself, the Lord, is not doing this because of Israel's worthiness or their righteousness. Okay, because, we'll get that in a second. The end of verse 4 says that God is getting rid of these nations because of their wickedness. Verse 6, Moses even writes to the younger generation. He is telling them that God is not giving them this land because of their righteousness. Because after all, and Moses uses this again, God knows their hearts and knows that they are stiff-necked people. Even though this is the younger generation, okay? This is the generation that is going to be allowed to go in. We turn right back around in the book of Joshua and then in the book of Judges. Judges specifically. Oof, Judges is rough if you've ever read Judges. There's cycles of sin that they fall into. And if we're using human categories for it, it's way worse than what they did to cause them to fall out of favor with God before they were allowed to go into the promised land. Judges is rife with it. And by the end of Judges, it's really bad. If you've ever read the whole thing with the war with Benjamin and all that stuff, it's rough. So why is God doing this? What's the issue with the wickedness of these nations? Because I can see somebody reading these scriptures and they're like, okay, well, why has God got such an issue with these pagan nations. I mean, they don't even pray to God. They don't believe in Him. You know, why is this an issue to God? Well, let's move on. Kayla, will you read Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 17 and 18?
Chapter 10.
Yep, 17 and 18.
The Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, a great God, a mighty and a terrible, which regardeth not persons nor taketh reward. He doth execute the judgment of the fatherless and widow, and loveth the stranger in giving him food and raiment.
So, in yours it says, taking no persons or reward. Okay, and mine, it specifically says taking no bribes. Remember just a few weeks ago when we were talking about Balaam, you know, great guy, right? And King Balak. Remember what they were doing, trying to gain God's favor, to get God's permission to curse the Israelites? Every time they kept trying to do more sacrifices, appease to Him, try to gain favor. It wasn't about worship. Not like how Israel's sacrifices were. When Israel was to do a sacrifice, it was a form of worship. But what Balaam and Balak were doing, and we talked about how when people who are outside of Christianity, okay, Christians, we are not going in on church on Sunday and singing, you know, our 3 songs and listening to a 45-minute sermon, you know, if you're on the Southern time clock of preaching. No, we don't go in there just to sing these songs, you know, so, you know, our neighbor can hear how glorious our singing is. And we don't go in there to do it to, you know, try to raise our arms as high as we can so that way the pastor can see how wonderful our preaching is. No, we're doing these things, or should be doing them, to give adoration and praise to the God who saw us through the week, who has been with us since the day we were born. The God who, before we were ever born, took our sin and punishment on the cross. But when people who are outside of Christianity, they think of God as like a genie. Okay, they think they can rub the Bible and out pops the Spirit of God and you get your 3 wishes and then if He doesn't grant them, then oh well, I guess God wasn't real. I guess atheism had it right, and then they shut the Bible and then they pick it up again. And that's what Balaam and Balak were doing. They were trying to gain favor with God, and that's not how it works. And that's why I love the scripture right here, because it says God is a God who does not take bribes. God is impartial. Because there is nothing we can do to gain His favor. That is a very sinful approach to God, is when we say, okay, God, here I am, here's my sacrifice. I need you this week, God, so if you just help me, I promise I'll be nice to the old lady next door. God, I promise if you help me, then I will go to church on Sunday and I will tithe even $100. Oh my gosh. I'll make sure I put it in the collection plates, that way everybody can see it and be like, I put that there.
Make sure you put it at the bottom so somebody else stacks on top.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
Don't put it in an envelope.
Yeah, put it on. God is a holy and just God, and that's what we're getting out of this scripture here in Deuteronomy 10. God is holy and just, and it says He executes judgment for the fatherless, for the widow, and loves the resident alien. That could be a whole other subject for another day. But, really step on your toes. But what He's saying here is for those who are weak, for those who need Him, for those who absolutely are the downtrodden. Right? God executes justice for humanity. Many people read stories in the Old Testament. I've talked about this time and time again. And the first thought when and I get this even when I talk about the Old Testament to somebody out in the world. Wow, I can't believe a loving God would do something like this. I can't believe he would destroy so many. It's because they don't dive into the history behind these stories. We when we started going into Deuteronomy a few weeks ago, we talked about the 7 nations that are in the Promised Land at this point. We talked about and I'll butcher these, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. I think I said those all right. Here's the thing. Okay, again, somebody reads the book of Joshua and says, man, I can't believe Israel was so bloodthirsty. They went in and they were commanded by God to kill everything. But here's the thing. Those 7 nations, I've done my history, I've done my work on this, all worshipped Baal, Asherah, Anak, Moloch, and Ashtoreth. All worshiping to those 5 type of false gods included child sacrifice, sexual immorality practices, and a whole lot of other dark stuff that I don't want to talk about on camera. Okay? It's funny because to me, we see people all the time online calling for the heads of criminals. Okay, when they see somebody that has been arrested for something, they're like, oh man, they should put them in a wood chipper. We seek justice when we believe someone deserves punishment or even the death penalty. We're fine with that. But then when the God who created the universe does it, all of a sudden he's the bad guy. It's so hypocritical. God is not the bad guy because he's executing justice. He's the only one who can truly do it. But yet he is telling Israel here that he is accomplishing these things against these nations because of their wickedness and how sinful they are. And I think Hammond hit on this note last week when he was talking about, this is just a big symbolism for the judgment that will come one day. Again, what will God do? God will execute judgment on those that never chose him, who chose to live a life according to their pleasures, to their whims, and to say, okay, God, just screw you, I'm going to do whatever I want. But he is a God of ultimate justice. But we also have to remember he's also a God of ultimate mercy. That's why, again, I get so just, I don't want to say mad, but I want to smack myself in the face every time somebody says that the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament are 2 different gods, or God somehow changed his mind and became more chill.
It's also too that when people say that they're basing their logic off of what they determine to be good and evil.
Yeah.
And it's always a shifting target. And I mean, I can make whatever I want to be. I mean, heck, look at all the religions that make polygamy good.
Yep.
Look at all the religions that belittle women and say that's good.
Yep.
You can say whatever you like, but when your target's constantly shifting, it is not true.
Right.
God is the only one who can determine that.
One more major thing I want to make sure that we understand about this section is that it mirrors Paul's words in Romans. So, Shu, will you look up Romans chapter 11 and read verses 19 through 22?
Romans 11:19 through 22.
Yeah.
That will say then, the branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in. Well, because of unbelief,
they were broken off, and thou standest by faith, but not high-minded, but fear. For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee.
So, again, this whole idea. Moses is telling this younger generation, hey, you guys are awesome, y'all are great, y'all are going to go into the promised land. However, y'all need to remember and stay humble, because God is not doing this because of your righteousness, because you're still a sinful people. Okay? But God is doing this because he's a God of justice, and these nations over here are wicked. He also gave y'all a promise that y'all were going to get this nation, so 2 birds, 1 stone. The Israelites were being gifted this land. And understand that it's a type of gift of salvation from God. They were being given a homeland, a nation, and a place where they could worship God. But God himself was the one who's providing a way for absolute victory for Israel. This should sound familiar. Jesus Christ has provided the way for salvation through his sacrifice and blood atonement for the sins of the world, so that the people under this new covenant, us, now have a spiritual nation, and I'm not talking about in the United States of America. We have a brotherhood and sisterhood of believers that we can worship together. We can be one with we can worship the one true God in spirit and truth, just as Jesus told the woman at the well. Just like Israel, who was told in the scriptures that we have read here tonight, they were to not think themselves highly or self-righteous, because God was doing this and giving them this out of love. It was God's choice to bestow this gift, not because of their own ability, so they had nothing to boast in. Likewise, what Romans is teaching us is that Christians under this new covenant are not to boast of their own self-righteousness, because we have none. The only righteousness we have is the righteousness that God puts inside of us. And what is specifically talking about in these scriptures that we read in Romans was how right now Israel has a limited rejection. Understand what I mean by that. There's a whole doctrine behind this, that there is a partial hardening of Israel's heart right now until God deals with them again in end times, which is what the whole book of Revelation is dealing with. And that's what that's for. But we cannot, like this younger generation of Israel, we are not now allowed to boast and be like, okay, well, God's given up on Israel, so now, hey, we're number one now. He's gotten rid of them, so now we've replaced them, right? And there's this whole thing I've been learning about called replacement theology, which says that the church has replaced Israel, which is an absolute and utter ridiculous lie. We have not replaced Israel at all. Israel is still under the old covenant. They are still going to be given that promise. However, if someone wants to be saved today, they still have to turn to Jesus Christ. Okay. In Luke, Jesus gave the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. The Pharisee boasted that he wasn't a sinner like the tax collector. His boasting was in his righteousness, which, again, he didn't have any. But this is exactly what God is warning Israel about, and what he warned us about today. We did nothing to save ourselves. Romans 5:8 even says that while yet we were in our sins, Christ died for us. This is the ultimate love of God. Again, we did not provide our way to salvation. It is nothing that we can do. There is no matter how many good works or how great of a person you think you are, there is nothing you can do to provide yourself salvation. We need to remain humble in this idea, which leads us to our last section for tonight. Bella, will you read Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 26 through 28?
Behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. A blessing if ye obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day. And it curse if ye will not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside out of the way which I command you this day, to go after other gods which ye have not known.
So with God's sovereignty of this whole situation put into proper context, that he is the one who is driving these nations to their destruction and prospering Israel, he tells them that he is placing the choice in their hands, placing before them a blessing and a curse. Notice the language here, it doesn't say a blessing or a curse, it says a blessing and a curse. If Israel keeps to the Lord their God, love him, obey him, and keep only to him, forsaking all others, all those other gods, okay, I'm saying this for a reason, and fulfill the commands that he gives them, they will receive the blessing of this land and keep it. But if they don't, they will receive a curse. I purposely used the type of language a moment ago that I've used when performing marriage vows because, again, it's very similar thing. Israel, like the church, is Israel's been, if I'm not mistaken now, if I am, I'm very sorry for screwing this up, but the church is referred to as the bride of Christ, okay, absolutely know that. But there are times in the Old Testament where Israel is also referred to as a bride of God, right? Yes? No? Maybe? Fact check me? Maybe? No?
Maybe, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure, no.
But the idea here is our covenant with the Lord is like a marriage covenant with our spouses. If we treat God with the same reverence that we should, again, we should have loyalty and devotion to our spouses. We should have loyalty and devotion also to God.
It's mostly in the Old Testament.
Okay.
Bride of God.
Okay, thank you. I love that we can just get on that fact checking right there. But sadly, God is treated with so much disrespect in today's world, just like how marriage is. And this isn't a thing on preaching on marriage. But so many people go to the altar today and say, when they're, performing their vows in front of their friends and family and the pastor and looking at the one that they say they love, say, well, if it doesn't work, there's always divorce. Well, think about how many people go to the altar of God, and they say all the right words, but they're thinking in the back of their head, well, if this thing with God doesn't work out, I'll just try something else. This is still a form of self-righteousness when people delude themselves into this type of thinking that they're a good person. That they, I really want to get into heaven, so I'll try this Christianity thing out. But you know what, if it doesn't, I was already a good person before. I open doors for old ladies, and I give to charities, so I know I'm a good guy. But that's not what, again, you're trying to get into heaven on your own merits. They think they're good enough to get salvation on their own. Many people, and again, this goes into something that not only I preach about and Hans preach about. I love that our Sunday school teacher, Monty, he talks about this a lot. That a lot of people have a knowledge of God. They know him in their head. They don't know him in their heart. What is it? I think there's a book he mentions all the time, Missing Heaven by 18 Inches, because that's the space between the brain and the heart. Because you know him, but there's no belief. And understand that when we talk about this, understand that even the devil knows God. The devil still has access before God's throne, which is a big thing to say because people are like, you mean the devil is not in hell and he's not the king of hell with a pitchfork and horns and a big tail? No, he's not. Again, read the book of Job. The devil has access to God's throne room where he stands accusing the saints before God's throne even today, but luckily we have a really good lawyer. So, God was preparing Israel to be a holy nation to the point to where through this warfare and through all these things that they were going to be doing, it was to point the Gentiles toward the one true God. They were to see Israel as something different. They were supposed to look upon them and be like, hey, there's something that this nation is doing right. And that's how Christians are to be today. We are to point people toward Christ. And that's the way it's supposed to be. But going back to Israel. FYI, just one last little thing. Yes, God was calling them to utterly destroy the pagan nations that were residing within the borders of the Promised Land. But if you notice in Deuteronomy 10:18, he says to love the resident alien. Israel wasn't just to destroy all the Gentile nations that they went to war with, but they were also called to love those who would come into Israel's borders. And yes, there were Gentiles that came to Israel and they became, a part of Judaism.
One of them is the line of Christ.
All right, keep going. Keep going.
I mean, Rahab, she was also a prostitute.
Yeah.
And where was that? That was Jericho. Yeah.
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 One of the first stories of
And she was
when they
spared.
start.
She was spared purely because of faith.
So again, we do have these stories where yes, it's like, oh man, I can't believe they did all, but then you see the stories of where those who were spared. Awesome place. But yeah, Israel would point the way, and there would be those that would, come to know the one true God. And again, one of those, as Hannah pointed out, was Rahab in the story of Jericho in Joshua. And again, she is listed as in the genealogy of Christ. So there we go. But the Pharisees and Sadducees of Jesus' time had such a hate for the Gentiles that they even were disgusted by the fact that Jesus would talk, eat, or even preach with them. And that was one of the things that, was used as a testimony against Christ at his trial. God has always shown his love for humanity, not just for the Jewish nation, but also for the Gentiles as well. And even though the hardships of his wrath, which again, understand that wrath usually is brought on through willful sin, God still has mercy. But to finish this up, Israel had a blessing and a curse upon them. They had a choice in the matter. They could either choose to serve the Lord their God, or to walk away, to pervert themselves, or to be a holy and just nation. This reflects the same choice we have today, and in the words of Joshua in Joshua 24:15, but if it does not please you to worship the Lord, choose for yourselves today which you will worship, the gods of your ancestors worship beyond the Euphrates River, or the God of the Amorites in the lands in which you are living. But as far as for me and my family, we will worship the Lord. And any questions?
I think Ruth was in Boaz too.
Yeah.
We have the whole story of the kinsman redeemer in that one.
Jess tells me that we eventually should do that one.
What, Ruth?
Yeah.
Ruth's great. Ruth's packed full of stuff.
I'll say.
Ruth goes into I don't know anything about that. Ruth also goes into one of the feasts.
Oh
of the
no.
Lord. Yeah.
Hey, it sounds like it's right up your wheelhouse. Alrighty, guys. Well, that's all I've got for tonight. Man, Bible studies are getting longer and longer. Something about
You
this.
start late today.
Well, a little bit, but it is something about these particular topics. I didn't think, to be honest, I didn't think we were going to be in Deuteronomy very long, in which, I mean, technically we're not, but the more I'm digging, the more I'm finding, and the more I'm just like, oh man, we got to talk about that. So, If you have any questions about this lesson or about self-righteousness or about the stories of the Old Testament or New Testament or have any questions about Christianity whatsoever, sorry, that kind of choked me up. I like questions, so please feel free to ask them. You can comment on the comment section down below this video. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe. And again, I humbly beg, if you are a member of the Guardians of Christ Facebook page, feel free to go over to our YouTube channel and like and subscribe there as well, as we're trying to grow that. That pepper's getting back at me. The itty bitty piece I had. And we are currently, there's a machination working in the background where we are coming together with a challenge that me and Hannon will be put through here soon for your entertainment. So that's working. That'll come maybe a few months. But anyways, God bless you guys. Have a wonderful week. And if there's anything we can pray for you about, please feel free to let us know. Our email is guardianschristministries@gmail.com. God bless and have a wonderful week.